Please welcome back to the stage Dr. David Agus.
Thank you. So my next panel is exciting because it's a topic that hits every single one of us, which is going to be drug pricing. And we have two remarkable speakers in this area. One is the current administrator. I love that title. I don't really know what it means, but she is the administrator, the head of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Seema Verma, and Bernard Tyson, who is the chairman and CEO of Kaiser. Chairman and CEO I get. So please come to the stage and let us begin our discussion. All right. So, Seema, you've got a big budget.
I had a big budget.
What is your budget?
$1.3 trillion. It's about a third of the federal budget, almost a third of the federal budget.
That's pretty amazing if you think about it just in sheer terms and numbers. So what percent right now of CMS spending is drugs?
Well, I can tell you it's our fastest growing area. You know, one of the things that we're concerned about is that at CMS we're running Medicare, Medicaid, the Obamacare exchanges. That's about 130 million people. We're the nation's largest insurance company. But we're also thinking about not just delivering high quality, accessible care to the people that we serve, but we want to make sure that the system is working well for all Americans. The high cost of care is something we're very concerned about. Our actuaries say that by 2026, we're going to be spending $1 in every $5 on healthcare. So that means 20% of your household budget on healthcare. So everything that we're doing is about making it more affordable. And when it comes to looking at what we're spending the most on, drug costs is one of the fastest growing areas of spend.
And is it all drug costs, or is it more the specialty drugs and the more expensive drugs that are growing, or is it across the board?
It's in different places, different areas. I think one area that we particularly see problems is where what we would say physician-administered drugs. I think the genesis and some of the problems is the way the government is paying for some of these drugs in the Medicare program, and we're, you know, the largest payer of drugs probably in the world because of our Medicare population. And for these physician-administered drugs, the way the government pays for them is they say, we're going to pay the average sales price, and then we're going to have an add-on fee of 6%. It's a little bit lower because of budget issues to the physicians. So you're basically telling the manufacturers whatever your average sales price is. You can charge whatever you want. And in that situation, we're not getting, you know, obviously we're not getting the best deal.
You're also incentivizing me as a doc to give the
That's
more
right.
expensive drug, which again, doesn't seem right in many regards.
That's exactly it.
You know, if I'm a biotech and pharmaceutical company, and by the way, I'm a fan of biotech and pharmaceutical companies, we need them. Without them, there literally is no hope in our space. But if I develop a drug for third-line liver cancer and it's the only drug, I could price it whatever I want. In a sense, you gave me a monopolistic power to do predatory pricing, which I know is a negative connotation, but it really is what the market will bear. Can we sustain such a system?
No, we can't. I think one of the things that I'm particularly concerned about, there's many issues in drug pricing. America's paying more than other countries. We're hearing stories of people having to travel, you know, across borders to get more affordable medications. The other thing that is concerning is we're sort of having the advent of new curative treatments. These are supposed to be one-time treatments. They're supposed to cure people, but we're seeing price tags now of $1 million, $2 million. That's completely unsustainable for the system. And if we're paying it, as we are, average sales price plus 4 or 5%, you know, that being said, we're not going to be able to afford this. I think we need, you know, we always want to encourage innovation, but innovation doesn't mean anything if people can't access the medications.
Thank you, that's true. Clap, please. Bernard, you can do something that Seema can't do, is you can bargain, and you can negotiate for drug prices. How do you do it? How do you decide what your formulary should be and where to take the line? Do you pay for a curative therapy that's millions of dollars, or don't you?
Well, if I had $1 trillion budget, I could really bargain.
Seema, are you willing to share with Kaiser?
I like to keep my cards myself.
She makes my $87 billion sound like nothing. How do you top that? You know, within the parameters, yes. We can bargain, and we bargain hard. And Our leverage comes from the fact that all 27,000 of our physicians are in the Permanente medical groups, and they can, if you will, move market share when there are choices that is based on the efficacy of the drug against the patient. So there's a high compliance, if you will, to the protocols for drug usage that's owned and managed by the physician group. And that means a lot, because then you get consistency of drug uses based on the indications, as you know. So that's very important. But it's within limits, and I think Seema covered it very well. The challenge now and I say this all the time, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So on one hand, in our lifetime, we now see the possibility of drugs that will cure, in which populations are dealing with the illness. So the hepatitis C, there's been drugs in the past, as you know, specialty drugs that have dealt with this, but they've been for a very small portion of the population, very expensive, and we all applaud the great work. And there's never a question that we publicly talk about in terms of the affordability question of it. But you get another drug now that can cure hepatitis C. And what an amazing thing. On the other hand, you have the issue of, if you belong to Kaiser Permanente and you need the drug, we cover it. But not everybody is getting the drug who needs it. So how do we deal with that as a society? Well, we can't. If it's so unaffordable, no one can afford it. So this affordability issue is a real issue that we got to put our heads around, or we are going to end up with an even greater disenfranchised section of Americans who will not benefit, in fact, from, in some cases, monies that they're putting into the research and everything else that helps to create these drugs.
Listen, I get it. I mean, I sequence the DNA of my patients with cancer, and at the end of the day, I get a report, and the sequencing is covered by Medicare, but the report says you may respond to drug X, Y, and Z. If they're not FDA approved for that indication, my patient has to mortgage his or her home in order to get that drug. And they have to decide, is it worth it to mortgage my home, right, or to be at my kid's graduation, or do I not want to do that? And obviously, it can't be sustainable. So, Seema, if you were able to close your eyes and get rid of politics, get rid of Democrats and Republicans, and to think 10 years from now, how would we optimally do it? Is this thing called value-based pricing real? Can it actually happen?
I think value-based pricing is where the whole market is going. And the concept with value-based pricing is that we are paying for outcomes and what is achieved. So better outcomes in terms of quality, longevity of life, quality of life, and then also for holding providers accountable for controlling costs. And I think that's where it needs to go. Bernard and I have talked a lot about social determinants of health. Right now, we pay the system when you're sick. We incentivize sick care, right? For you as a physician, the more you do, the more we pay you. We should think about paying you based on what you achieved. Did you keep your patient healthy? Did you improve their quality of life? And were you able to contain costs in an appropriate way to some sort of a benchmark? So that's sort of how we're moving. One of the things that I do want to come back to when we talked about drug pricing is the idea of negotiation. I think it's important. Negotiation works really well. We've seen that when there's competition in the marketplace, it works really well. I think at the end of the day, though, patients have to be empowered to make decisions about their care, and they need to be in the driver's seat. I think turning over negotiation to the government doesn't work well, because then it's the government making decisions about what drugs are going to be on that formulary. You just referenced your patient. Well, that drug was not on the formulary, and so it's not covered.
Well, the UK does it with the NICE system, right? They look at cost effectiveness and they... But
that's the government making all the decisions.
Right.
I think when you have in the Part D program where we have many providers that we essentially have open competition, and so patients can pick the plan that works best for them, and so they can look at the formulary and decide what they want to pick. I think that works better than the government making this decision for everybody about what drugs we're going to get. In the UK, their cancer outcomes are very poor as compared to the United States because we have more availability of drugs. So I think it's just something we need to think about, that we need to put patients in control of their care, not the government.
So your
And this is coming from a government bureaucrat.
damn government. Speaking of which, your transition from Indiana, where you got a lot done, to the federal government, what is that like?
Well, in Indiana, I always say, I could make 3 or 4 phone calls and we could get stuff done. People would come together on a bipartisan basis, and there was a goal. In DC, it's an extraordinarily bureaucratic process. I always say, it's a darn near miracle when we get a regulation out the door. I mean, it takes the government for even small and routine changes, just a long period of time. There's so much bureaucracy, and obviously there's a lot of politics as well, and special interest groups. This is why I'm always very concerned that we're hearing conversations about more government, more Medicare for all. I think those kinds of things are very scary to me because we see the day-to-day problems with the government-run system. We have a very talented team at CMS, and we can see sometimes what needs to get done, but we can't do that because some of the antiquated laws and special interest groups, don't want to make those changes. I think we just talked about drug pricing, and the Part B program is a great example of that. The government says we're going to pay the average sales price. So a lot of the problems that we have in healthcare are rooted in government policy. So I think for my view is that we move to a more competitive environment. The government's role is to create competition and to make sure that patients are protected.
What do you think about that, Bernard? Is the government's role to create competition?
Yeah, no, I think create the competition. As much as possible, make sure that we're all on a level playing field, that we're playing. The government has a regulatory role to protect the interests of the consumer, to make sure that there are ground rules around how we are to compete and in the best interest of the consumer. And a competitive environment will create better results. And I think that that's the way to go. I think that the idea of Medicare for all, I would argue that we have enough in the toolkit right now. We need to continue to refine it and to change it and to move it forward. I would say in that regard, with my own experience with the Affordable Care Act, if you end up with a partisan selected anything at this point for the health system, we spent a lot of money preparing for and taking care of ACA exchange patients, and we're proud of that. It needs to continue to be changed so it can work even better, and there's resistance. And so I'm not playing any politics here. It's just that we're in the middle trying to take care of patients. I think the same would be true if we ended up with Medicare for all. I think that the idea that we would totally blow up the construct and create something new, I hope not, quite frankly.
It can't happen. I mean, there's no way it could happen.
But on the other hand...
Why are you giving me that look?
I'm shocked that we're even having these conversations. I mean, going back, and if we talk about Obamacare, right? And I'll just stick to the facts, keep politics out of it. We have so many people that cannot afford health insurance. Rates after the Affordable Care Act, rates have gone up 100% on average. So what other product in the US economy has gone up 100% in that short of a period of time? In some cases, in states, 200%. And now we are creating a new class of uninsured. These are our middle income, middle class Americans that can't afford health insurance. If they're subsidized, it's fine. And the conversation I think we need to be having is, how do we address the high costs of healthcare? Just saying we're going to have a government takeover, let's just have the government pay for everything, that's just going to increase our taxes. That's not solving the problem. And the problem is, how do we control healthcare costs? How do we keep innovation? How do we make the system easier to use for consumers and for patients?
And how do we push for health? I mean, prevention and health kind of get left out of that equation, but that's going to help everything on the downstream.
But I want to build on that, and I talk a lot about, you got to think about healthcare from the affordability of two areas. There's one about the affordability of coverage because of our system in the United States, and then there's the affordability of care. So what has happened over the last, let's say, decade is that the insurance industry have created a variety of products that ends up with a premium point that one would say it's affordable.
Right.
But what comes with that are deductibles that could be anywhere from $1,000 to $15,000. And so you're paying $100 for a premium, and so you can afford the coverage. But then you get sick, and you go into the delivery system, and you discover that the $100 didn't cover now what you have to pay, which is $1,000, because that's how the coverage became affordable. Now the care is unaffordable. That's the dilemma that many Americans are dealing with right now, and that's why it's unaffordable. The focus needs to be on the affordability of care and coverage, and that is something we have to continue to do inside of the healthcare delivery system.
Let's change the focus back for a minute to drugs. So, we've seen in the past year a drug for blindness coming out at over $800,000. We see drugs in the pipeline that potentially can cure diseases that will be in the several millions of dollars. Whose job is it in the long run to going to be say, hey, we have to put a stop here? We really have to have controlled pricing in drugs. Who's going to step in, do you think? If it's government, who in government? I mean, whose job is this?
I think we all do. I do want to be careful, and I go back to, I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I do think, Seema touched on something very important. One issue is we're moving from this as an industry, fee-for-service, to value-based, a different approach that looks at outcomes.
We're moving very slowly,
right?
but yes.
Well, we've always had it inside of Kaiser Permanente. I mean, that's our model.
You are
right?
an anomaly.
Yeah, right.
And your company's an anomaly too, by the way.
And look at the results. I mean, they speak for themselves, quite frankly. There's another issue about how to look at the total cost of care over a lifetime of an individual. Many people don't know that, I'm making up the numbers in terms of I'm in the neighborhood, but for the sake of this discussion, 20% of the population is using about 80% of the healthcare dollars. The majority of the dollars are spent, as you know, in the last 3 to 6 months of a person's life. And in fact, the majority of those dollars are in the last 30 days of a person's life. So the whole economics of the lifetime cost of a person needs to be really thought through in the context that we're talking about. And so I am so pleased how much Seema supports, for example, how do we look at the social determinants of health? That is a better indicator of what's going to happen through your lifetime than almost anything else where you live will predetermine many things that's going to happen with your health.
It's amazing that your zip code is more important than sequencing your entire genome.
That's exactly right, exactly right. So the $800,000 is a lot of money. The total cost of care of an individual is a lot of money. So how do you look at the total economics now if we are in fact going to be living in our generation where you have drugs that cure versus managing illnesses and diseases, which are also very expensive over the lifetime of a person.
Yours accepted where we're switching health plans every few years.
Right.
Who's responsible for that big outlay? So whose job is it?
I think there is a role for government. To some degree, if we look at the government programs that we have right now, they are taking care of some of the most vulnerable. I mean, the Medicare population, by bringing that out of the entire healthcare market, having the government pay for it, that keeps costs down for everybody else. But I think what we're seeing is beyond Medicaid and our low-income populations and our disabled populations, there's even within sort of the mid-group there are still very high-cost populations. And that's where I think government does have a role to play. One of the things that we're seeing across the nation is many states are experimenting with reinsurance programs where they're saying, we're going to take this high-risk, high-cost segment of our society and we're going to have the government fund those individuals. That actually helps keep healthcare costs down for the entire population. So I think those are the types of things that government can do. Again, we're not running the system, but that's an appropriate role for government, taking care of those most vulnerable populations. On the high-cost drugs, I think this is a discussion that we need to have. I mean, if it's your child or your baby that's blind and could benefit, of course you're going to pay whatever that price tag is. You're going to want to pay for it. It's your loved one. That being said, the system can't afford it, and we need to think about a new paradigm.
You know, we were able to patent a gene in this country until several years ago, and the BRCA test costs $5,000. You know, the Supreme Court said you can no longer patent a gene, and that test now is $70. So a remarkable democratization of a technology. The problem is these new drugs, again, it is more predatory pricing. So I still don't know whose job it is to make that determinant. Is it going to be the president? Is it going to be legislature to say, hey, we need to have a czar on drug pricing?
We don't have the authority today, and I think that's why we hear so much about the president really pushing hard on drug pricing. The president understands that this is important to our entire healthcare future, addressing drug costs. We've put out proposals. I think the president's prepared to move forward on that. Congress is debating this right now, and we hope that they will come together and develop a bipartisan solution to this.
I don't understand that word, bipartisan. You know, we talk about the high prices. I mean, the ramification of low prices is seen today where a particular chemotherapy drug for children called vincristine, there's no supply of in the country because the profit margins were so low, the company said, hey, why should I make that much of it? And for a number of reasons, we have a national shortage of it. So the other side is going to be critical too. Somebody's got to be in charge here. And I'm not quite sure. I mean, obviously who, and that scares me.
Well, in most of the industry, the government plays a regulatory role in different segments of it. We have it on our health plan side. We have it in care delivery. I do think there's a role to be played with the government in making sure these kinds of issues aren't happening, quite frankly. The second one is, you know, we talk a lot about the runaway pricing around specialty drugs, but generic drugs now are also going up, and you know, Americans are very frustrated with, you know, the price of insulin today versus what it was 4, 5, 10 years ago. The EpiPen is one of the biggest issues, you know, for people who has allergies like myself, and you're walking around with a $600 needle that has a, you know, time-bound use, and it can save a life, obviously. But it has shot up, and so you have it all the way around. And if we are going to focus, as we should be, seriously on affordability, we have to all be in. And I don't want to blame one part of the industry. We all have to work together to create a different kind of value proposition that is going to be more affordable.
I agree with you. I mean, you know, we keep talking value-based care, but I don't even know what the word value truly means. So defining it is going to be critical, and it has to be a multi-stakeholder plan. And I think we're all praying for that in the field. I mean, both of you are tremendous leaders praying for it, but it's just not happening, and it's not happening quick enough. And I think we see that. I mean, in the case of BRCA, right, it took over a decade for the Supreme Court to make that decision. Hundreds of thousands of women died in that course because they couldn't pay for access to look at their own DNA. They couldn't pay the ransom there. Are you hopeful in the next 18 months we're going to have progress here?
I'm always hopeful. I mean, I think that the American people are demanding that. I think that what we hear day in and day out, healthcare is one of the top issues. I think people are fed up with the system. I think they like their doctors, they like the care that they're getting, but they're fed up with the system. They're tired of surprise bills. We're hearing about predatory practices of hospitals that are going, you know, not-for-profit hospitals that are going after people, you know, for bills when they're being charged, you know, huge list prices. So we're hearing about those kinds of things. We're hearing about providers that are blocking patients' access to their healthcare records. So I think we need to come together, as Bernard said, come together. We all have collective work to do, but we need to listen to what the American people are saying.
Are you optimistic, Bernard?
Oh, very much so. I think that, you know, the advances that we're making in the medical field is unbelievable, and everyone should be benefiting from that. You know, inside of our system, we take care of 12.4 million people, and it's all coordinated and connected. The fact that you can now come in the morning and get a joint replacement and go home that evening, the fact that we can monitor your care remotely with technology. You could go in for a heart procedure in the morning and you're walking in the afternoon. Tremendous progress that we all should be benefiting from in this country. So the haves of the world, we on this stage, the cost of care, yeah, we can complain, but we have different options. It's what's the standard that we want for everyone? And we have programs, Medicaid, the exchange, Medicare, commercial. We have to think holistic about all of it. And I think that the pressure points that people are placing on us are forcing us to really reckon with how we're going to deal with it. And I'm optimistic that like-minded people will continue to come together to work on this issue, but we have to solve it.
And I thank the audience, and I thank both of you. I think what you see is real optimism that we're at an inflection point in our field, but frustration because of equality of care, because some of the pricing issues. But I hope we can come to some meaningful impasse here, get past the impasse to making it. But I thank both of you for your leadership and what both of you have done for the healthcare world and for our country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.